My name is Emily Schmidt. I am 42 years old, American, and for the past 6 years, I was the lead automation architect at Arcadia Systems. I built the structure that moved every update, every payroll cycle, every internal release across the company. The kind of system no one notices until it stops. And on paper, it was valued at just over $3.2 million per quarter. In practice, it was worth more than that because it ran without fail and it ran because of me. They found me in the server control room eventually. Not crying, not shouting, just laughing. The quiet, deliberate kind. The kind that rises when everything you built begins to push back and no one else in the room knows why. By then, it was too late. The entire release queue had stalled. Internal access logs were looping, reporting systems frozen, and through it all, the last thing still trying to reach me was the machine they thought they had locked me out of. 2 days earlier, it was Friday, 6:47 in the evening. Most of the lights were already off, the floor almost empty. I was on my way out when I saw him, Paul Granger, Vice President of Engineering, my direct superior for the past 11 months, the kind of executive who only shook your hand when someone else was watching. He had that voice, smooth, clipped, confident, like everything he asked was already assumed to be agreed upon. "We need coverage this weekend," he said. "Pushes are critical. Monday's visible." He did not ask, he just paused. I looked at him and said one word: "No." He blinked once, not in surprise but in irritation, like a vending machine that swallowed his money and gave nothing back. "Excuse me," he said, though he had heard me clearly. I repeated it. "No." My contract covered 40 hours. My team had already delivered everything scheduled. There was no emergency. There was only a man expecting obedience and a woman who no longer offered it. He smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile. Too fast, too even. "Got it," he said. "Thanks for the clarity." That was all. He turned, walked away whistling a familiar tune like it meant something, and I stood still, watching him disappear down the hallway. I was not angry. I was not even surprised. But I had seen that kind of smile before, the kind that is handed out just before something is taken quietly. That weekend, I rested. I walked to the cafe on 5th Street, read through documentation no one had asked me for, and slept without watching for the next move. I knew something was coming, but I also knew something they did not. The system they depended on, it had not forgotten me. If you are still here, maybe on your lunch break, maybe walking out like I just did, leave a trace. Just tell me where you are listening from. Because some people break the silence with noise, some with heat, but some of us, we build something inside it and let it wait. Monday morning, 7:58. My badge failed at the main door. I tried again. Red light, access denied, Slack disconnected. Email returned unknown. No meeting, no farewell, no statement, just absence. They did not fire me. They just erased me. Except the structure they tried to control still remembered who wrote its bones, and while they celebrated the silence, it had already started to speak. At 7:58, the badge reader blinked red. I tried again, same result. The scanner clicked, not with resistance, but with disinterest. Access denied. I stepped back, phone in hand, and opened the remote panel. The company's system refused to connect. Network unavailable. Identity not recognized. I was no longer on the grid, but the system didn't know how to forget me. Inside the control logic, somewhere deep beneath the interface everyone else saw, a process began to stir. It had no name in the documentation, no ticket in the archive, no one in the office even knew it existed. But I did. I had written it, long before any of them remembered my name in a meeting. It was not code. It was a decision, quietly folded into the routine heartbeat of the infrastructure. Every cycle that pulsed through that system carried one assumption. If the architect disappears without warning, lock the gates and wait. And on that morning, that is exactly what it did. At 8:03, the first anomaly appeared, a minor delay in the reporting dashboard, a fetch request that stalled longer than usual. One of the analysts might have seen it, might have thought it was a memory glitch or a queue spike, but it was not noise. It was the system asking a question. It was looking for someone who was no longer allowed to answer. By 8:05, the internal release process had reached its scheduled trigger point. It pulled for new instructions. It found silence. It pulled again. Nothing. And with each unanswered query, it began counting. 5 unanswered signals. That was the threshold. And I had set that threshold 6 months earlier, on a night when I had been left off a promotion list for the third time. While they celebrated someone else, I stayed late. Not to retaliate, not to lash out, just to prepare. Because I knew this place, and I knew people like Paul. I knew how they smiled when they said your work was critical, right before they rewrote the directory that held your name. So I left something behind. Not malware, not sabotage, just a log. A structure that said if the core signature fails to reply 5 times, halt everything. Not loudly, not destructively, just stop. Require manual override. From one source, mine. At 8:11, the alerts began. I was not there to see them. I was across the street at a window seat in a quiet cafe, drinking something warm and unsweetened. I watched through the glass as shadows shifted on the fourth floor, people leaning over desks, brows furrowing, notifications blinking. They were starting to notice, not the cause, just the cracks. The internal discussion channels lit up first. Is anyone seeing blocked reporting logs? Trying to push, but nothing's confirming. Where's Emily? She's on this, right? But Emily was not on anything. Emily was sitting with both hands still, watching a building she had fortified begin to ask itself why its heartbeat no longer matched. At 8:15, the finance team tried to release weekly disbursements. Nothing moved. Payment processing had been integrated months earlier into the core job stream, one of the first upgrades I'd introduced. It streamlined approvals. It also listened to the same checkpoints, and those checkpoints were now looking for someone who had been erased. At 8:19, Paul called me. I did not answer. At 8:21, he sent a message. We're seeing access issues. Come in and we'll sort it out. I read it once and took a screenshot, not because I planned to use it, but because I wanted to remember the exact moment he stopped pretending. At 8:25, a second message. Did you configure any kind of lockdown protocol? We're stuck. Let me know now. Now, that word always comes too late, when the consequences begin to arrive ahead of the explanation. But I said nothing. I folded my phone, looked out the window, and listened to the steady rhythm of the city. Inside their building, the walls were starting to sweat. They thought they had removed me. What they had done was trigger the one thing they never reviewed, because the value of an architect is not in the code she writes while the team is watching. It is in the choices she buries into the frame, the ones that only matter when no one is left to answer the call. By 8:32, the process had entered a loop. On the surface, everything appeared calm, just a minor disruption, a false start, a queue that needed to be cleared. Inside the release panel, the progress bar glowed green. The lights blinked on. The dashboard showed recovery in progress, but none of it was real. The system had entered the second phase of its fail-safe. To the untrained eye, it looked like restoration, like someone had pressed the right button, like the team had solved the problem before it ever grew. But what they were watching was a simulation, a rehearsal of resolution. The commands they issued were being rerouted. The deployment scripts they triggered were being swallowed into a closed circuit. And every success message they saw was a mirror reflecting nothing. I watched the man in the checkered shirt lean back from his monitor nodding. I could see him from my window seat across the street. He had no idea the code he had pushed was never executed, that the patch he sent into production was now sitting inside a vault I had built months earlier. Not for this. Not to trap anyone, just to test something. The system was never designed to crash. It was designed to measure who noticed when the rhythm changed. At 8:45, the head of quality assurance messaged the team. Look stable, rolling forward. At 8:47, the internal channels flooded with relief. Back online. Thanks everyone for quick turnaround. Restarting my queue. At 8:53, Paul sent his first broadcast message of the morning. All systems green. Good hustle, everyone. I read it with a still expression. Not anger, just familiarity. Paul had always been better at timing than understanding. He knew when to step into a room, not why the fire had stopped. And now, standing at the center of a crisis he did not control, he mistook the echo for applause. By 9:15, the meeting invites began to fly. Coordination calls, team huddles. A full recap was scheduled for 10. Paul prepared a deck. I could imagine him rehearsing the narrative. how his leadership guided the team through a surprise disruption, how he personally reviewed the logs, coordinated recovery, restored functionality. But while he spoke, the loop continued. No data was moving into the live environment. No releases were passing validation. Every process they celebrated was being recorded, tagged, and routed into a hidden archive. Not because I wanted to expose anyone, but because I wanted to see how many people would pretend nothing happened if the lights stayed on. It was not about vengeance. It was about clarity. They had not fixed anything. They had bypassed the warning. And the system, still unsure if the person it trusted was coming back, had entered a holding pattern. A shadow environment, running parallel to the real one, invisible to every tool they used. I called it the loop, a circle of confident emptiness, the illusion of progress engineered with care. At 9:32, Paul called me again. I declined. At 9:35, he sent a message. If you built something that needs your key, we need to talk now. The phrasing caught my eye. If. Still uncertain. Still unwilling to admit that what was failing was not just a system, but their belief that I had ever been replaceable. 9:38. The automation manager posted a note in the team thread. Something feels off. Logs look too clean. At 9:41, the first junior developer noticed something strange in the sandbox environment. The identifiers did not match the real environment tags. One of the task names was slightly wrong, just enough to flag a question. He asked quietly, "Are we deploying to a clone?" No one answered. By 9:48, the user interface build triggered again. The log said success, but no changes appeared, and still the reports continued. Still, the rooms filled. Still, Paul finalized his narrative. He stood in front of the glass wall, jacket off, expression composed. I could not hear him, but I had heard that voice before. The voice that turns silence into credit, that tells people things are fixed before they understand what broke. He would finish the sentence with a smile. He would look confident, and he would never know that the only reason the machine was not screaming yet was because it was still waiting for me. By 9:52, I knew what they were doing. They had mistaken silence for safety. They had read success from a panel that only knew how to blink green, and assumed the system had returned to them like a dog called back from the dark. They were pushing new versions now, rushing, cutting, patching in plain view, not realizing the real environment was no longer responding. But the ghost was, and I had given the ghost a place to write. It was not a backup. It was not a trap. It was a second memory built quietly across the past year, a habit I developed after watching too many projects collapse beneath misaligned intentions and retroactive edits. I had created a vault, not to harm, but to hold, not to punish, but to prove. A quiet container that accepted every change pushed into the system after the loop began. Every file, every configuration, every forgotten line of old code accidentally reintroduced. All of it stored, all of it tagged, not to break them, but to let them finish breaking themselves. By 10:20, the first emergency patch had already been pushed twice. One version included a known workaround that had been deprecated 6 months earlier. The other was missing an access control list entirely. On any other day, someone like me would have flagged it. Quietly, respectfully, in a side message, not a public thread. That was the culture. Smooth over, then solve. But now, no one was smoothing. They were celebrating. 10:33. The release coordinator sent a message to the executive channel. Recovery complete, no client impact. I read it while sipping water, seated at the corner table by the cafe wall. A couple next to me talked about vacation. A child dropped a spoon, and in the world across the street, my name still did not exist, but my structure did. It was watching, not analyzing, not correcting, just keeping a record. By 10:47, the user experience team demoed the new interface update on a screen 3 floors up. I could see the presentation reflected in the glass. They were proud, and I did not blame them. They were solving the wrong problem, but they had no reason to know that. No one had told them the real system had not accepted a single instruction all morning. No one had told them the loop was only showing what Paul needed to see. And Paul? He had moved on. He was preparing to speak at the 11:15 executive debrief, a closed-room recap for department heads and 2 members of the board. A quiet success story, a cleaned up sequence of screenshots, a perfectly paced narrative of disruption, coordination, recovery, and at the center of it, himself. He had taken the silence of my absence and tried to frame it as proof of his command. And still, the vault recorded. It noted the timestamps, it tracked the input, it mirrored the chat logs where security validations were skipped to expedite speed. It archived the moment someone pasted live credential strings into a configuration file, exposed for 63 seconds before being overwritten. Not out of malice, just pressure. And that was always how things cracked here. Not because someone hated the rules, but because the rules got in the way of the meeting. At 11:21, a junior analyst posted a question in the support thread. Why are error logs missing from today's sync? The reply came fast. Already resolved, visual bug. It was not a lie, not exactly, but it was the kind of answer that sounds right to people who are already moving on. I leaned back and folded my hands. The vault was full now, not just with code, but with context, with decisions, with timing, with names. Not for revenge, for clarity, because I knew what would happen next. Paul would speak. The system would stay quiet. The board would nod. The team would move forward. And nothing in that room would ask who had actually stopped the collapse. But I would have the answer. Not to use, not yet, just to hold. Because the only thing more dangerous than a broken system is one that believes it has fixed itself. And the only thing more powerful than speaking out loud is waiting until the silence becomes undeniable. At 11:14, the conference room door closed. Inside, behind the soundproof glass and a carefully arranged tray of still water, the meeting began. It was labeled as a routine technical recap, internal systems review, 10 minutes scheduled, just enough time for Paul to deliver a rehearsed summary and move on. No expectation of challenge, no anticipation of scrutiny. He had done this before. He entered the room with the calm of a man who believed the worst had passed. His jacket was buttoned, his notes were printed. His voice, when he began, carried the measured confidence of someone speaking to people too senior to question the mechanics. And for the first few minutes, no one did. He opened with a phrase I had heard him use in other rooms. We identified a brief automation misfire this morning tied to outdated credential caching. It sounded official. It sounded plausible. It sounded like the sort of thing no one would stop to verify. He continued. Our internal teams responded immediately. All production impact was contained. Redundancy protocols engaged as designed. Core deployment recovered without delay. At 11:17, I watched from a secure relay window, an old legacy interface they had never properly decommissioned. I still had access, not because I forced it, but because no one had remembered to remove it. That was always the gap. They removed names, not structures. Inside the room, Paul advanced to slide 3. The title read, Incident Timeline. It showed a neatly formatted sequence. 8:03, detect. 8:07, respond. 8:32, validate. 9 o'clock, resume. The green arrows were symmetrical. The fonts were precise. And for a moment, no one interrupted. Then came the voice I recognized. Calm, direct. Can we see the raw logs from the 8 o'clock cycle? It was not a request. It was a test. The speaker was Jared Linwood, board member, former technical founder of a logistics firm that had once collapsed due to a similar incident. He had not said a word during the first half of the presentation, but now he leaned forward, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Paul blinked once, smiled. We archived the logs during resolution. I can follow up with our infrastructure team. Jared nodded slowly. And those logs confirm successful deployment to the live environment? Paul hesitated. Yes, our indicators showed restored function by 9. That was not the question, and Jared knew it. A second voice entered, Susan Chang, head of risk. Can you clarify whether the validation step was run on the actual release pipeline or a staging simulation? Paul's answer came slower this time. The environments are mirrored. For all functional purposes, there's no difference. But there was, and people like Susan knew where to listen. The room shifted. What had started as a summary began to feel like an interrogation. Paul moved to his final slide. What matters is that the system remained stable and we avoided client disruption. The words were correct. The tone was not. By 11:21, the questions began to overlap. Why was there no incident ticket filed? Why was the automation restart not timestamped? Who validated the rollback conditions? Paul answered where he could, deferred where he could not, and smiled through all of it. But I could hear it, the edge behind the words, the slight break between lines. Not panic, not yet, but calculation. A man updating his own narrative in real time, hoping no one noticed the version shift. I did not need to be in the room. The system was speaking for me. Every gap they questioned, every step Paul failed to account for, had been recorded. Not by me, by the archive still quietly collecting in the background. The vault he never knew existed. The one built not to punish, but to observe. And it was watching him now. At 11:29, Jared closed his notebook. One last question, he said. Who built the original pipeline configuration? Paul paused. Emily Schmidt, he replied. My name spoken aloud for the first time all day, but that was years ago. Jared nodded, then silence, and that was the end of the meeting. Paul gathered his notes. The board members filed out. No handshake, no congratulations, just quiet, delayed, heavy. And somewhere inside the building, the system continued to loop, not because it was broken, but because it was waiting. At 11:37, I turned off the feed. I did not smile. I did not move. I just let the silence return, because sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the absence of the one person who understood how it was supposed to work. At 12:04, a message appeared on the internal announcement board. It was not dramatic. No subject line in all caps. No urgent red icon. Just a short note, cleanly written, with a heading that read, Postmortem. Observations from a parallel archive, below it a single link. Not external, not flagged. Just a standard embedded address. A dashboard familiar to anyone in the building. A system they all used. A format they all recognized. No one questioned who posted it. It came from an address still whitelisted in the system. A name no longer listed on the team page, but one the access controls had never been told to forget. Some ignored it at first. Another recap, another set of retrospective slides, a summary someone put together to wrap the morning's chaos. But those who clicked saw something else. The page opened to a timeline, not a dramatic one. No bold letters, no colors, no blame, just facts, timestamps, side-by-side entries. On the left, what Paul's report said had occurred. On the right, what the system had actually done. At 12:06, a junior engineer named Marissa clicked the link. She was sitting in the open workspace on the third floor, finishing a sprint summary. She read the first line, then the second. Then she stopped typing. At 12:09, someone in finance clicked it. Then one of the compliance leads. By 12:13, the board had passed the link to legal, and by 12:19, the number of viewers had passed 40. The link did not accuse, it revealed. Each section held logs cleanly formatted, snapshots of configuration edits, credential placements, expired access controls. One section labeled Redundancy Misalignment showed the moment a critical fallback failed silently at 8:08. No error surfaced, no human noticed, but the archive had. Then came the screenshots. Internal chat logs, not taken secretly, but public threads, comments dismissed or marked resolved by people in a rush. A line from 3 months ago, no one uses the legacy trigger anymore, right? A reply from Paul, push it through, we'll clean later. Under that, a chart, 47 pushes, 0 successful deployments, and no rollback. Then came the credential string. Not redacted, committed by Paul in a panic at 8:26 that morning. Pulled into the ghost environment, immediately exposed, overwritten, yes, but logged. The vault had seen everything. It did not dramatize, it did not edit, it simply listed. What they clicked was not a leak, it was a mirror. At 12:25, Paul saw it. He was in the South Wing conference area, checking his email before heading into a marketing sync. He paused when he saw the subject line. He clicked it. He scrolled. He stopped. The light above him did not change. The hallway did not collapse. No sirens, no alarms. But something behind his eyes began to falter, because he recognized his own name, over and over, tied not to triumph, not to ownership, but to patterns of absence. His own absence from responsibility. From follow-up, from design. At 12:28, someone from legal pinged his assistant. Is Paul available? At 12:31, a member of the board forwarded the link to Jared Linwood. No message, just the link. I did not watch this part live. I did not need to. I had built the structure of it 2 months earlier, alone, in the quiet hours after my role had been quietly reduced. Not removed, just shrunk. Invitations not sent, threads not tagged, leadership syncs quietly moved to rooms I was not invited to. But I had stayed, not out of hope, out of discipline. And now that discipline was showing them what it had remembered. 12:37, the link was restricted. The internal server blocked new viewers, but by then it had already been opened over 80 times. A private board mirrored, a second copy sent to external counsel, with each page watermarked and time-stamped, not to threaten, not to expose, just to make it real. Because when you remove someone quietly, you expect their absence to settle. But mine never did. It waited, it archived, and when they tried to close the loop, it left the door open just wide enough for the truth to walk in. By 12:40, the office had entered a silence it didn't know how to break. There were no official statements, no lockdown alerts, just a link, passed too far, too fast for anyone to ignore. The moment came and went without ceremony. No crash, no breach, no scandal. Just a shift in how people began to look at the hallway, the conference room, the man still pretending to hold the center. Paul Granger was still in the building, still making eye contact, still wearing a tailored jacket as if fabric could anchor authority. But the confidence that used to follow him now stepped aside. Conversations stopped when he walked past, but not out of respect, just out of calculation. Everyone was asking the same unspoken question: who knew? And more importantly, who stayed quiet? By 1:15, department heads canceled calls. By 1:30, Slack threads stopped tagging Paul. Not one message was confrontational, but every absence was a signal, and he felt it. At 1:46, Paul walked into the boardroom. He carried the same folder from that morning, the same script, but the table was not the same. Jared sat at the head, Susan to his right, and a quiet legal counsel just left of center. No greetings, no opening smiles, just eye contact, sharp and still. Paul began to speak. The words were steady. We've resolved the incident, no long-term impact, alignment preserved. But they sounded like they had been written for an audience that no longer existed. Jared did not nod. Susan did not write. The legal counsel did not blink. Then Jared asked one question. Have you reviewed the vault? Paul paused. He answered eventually. I've read the documents. I understand the context. Susan followed. Do you deny authoring the overrides listed on page 7? I don't recall exact phrasing, Paul said, but I may have approved emergency revisions under pressure. And the access credential posted at 8:26? That was meant to be temporary, contained? And the rollback condition skipped at 8:32? Silence. Then, I was told it was non-critical. The room did not respond. They did not raise their voices. They did not accuse him. They let his answers hang unsupported. At 1:53, Jared closed the folder. We'll be following up. Paul didn't ask what that meant. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, picked up his folder, then left the room. But when the door closed behind him, he didn't just walk out of a meeting. He walked out of a structure that no longer answered to his name, and the silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was confirmation. At 2:17, the message came, a calendar invite, no branding, no headline, just 4 names on a private link, Jared, Susan, Linda, and mine. The subject line was cautious. Strategic realignment closed session. I joined without a word. Camera off, microphone muted. Just a black square on their screen. No title, no initials. Just the presence they couldn't remove anymore. Linda began. Her voice was controlled but softer than I remembered. Emily, she said, thank you for joining us. I did not respond. She continued. We've reviewed everything, logs, records, decisions, and it's clear what happened and what didn't happen. She paused, looked down once, then up. We're not asking you to come back. A beat. We're asking if you'll consider building forward with us. Not under with, Jared leaned in. You know the system better than anyone, not just how it runs, but how it fails without you. We'd like you to lead the rebuild. Susan said. Independent architecture, your conditions, full discretion. And then the final offer, not spoken like a bribe, but like a concession. You own it, we license. That was the phrase, not promotion, not reinstatement, ownership. They were no longer offering a desk. They were asking for a boundary, and I had already drawn it. I let the silence stretch before speaking, not out of dramatics, but because I needed them to feel the absence that had rebuilt this moment. Then I said three things. 1. His name does not appear on anything I touch, not in logs, not in archives, not even in the memory of the system. You want this clean. Keep it clean. They nodded. 2. No one who stayed silent while I was removed works with me now. They can stay where they are, but not near me. This isn't about bitterness, it's about integrity. Susan wrote that down herself. 3. I don't rebuild what failed, I build what replaces it. My architecture, not yours. You want it? You lease it. I name it. I hold the keys. Jared leaned back and smiled, not politely, not proudly, just honestly. Understood. I didn't thank them. I didn't smile. I just logged off. 3 hours later, a courier delivered a box to my apartment. Inside was a brand new device, untouched, unregistered, and a note. Just a single sentence written by hand. You're live, build it your way. So I did. That evening, I opened a blank terminal. No shared folders, no inherited frameworks, no tokens I didn't write myself. The screen waited, and in that clean space, I typed the first line of something new. Quiet, lean, precise. Then I named the environment. Not after myself, not after the company, but after the one rule they had broken the moment they thought they could erase me. No access without authorship. I closed the screen, not with a sense of victory, just alignment. Because I hadn't come back. I had simply made sure no one else could ever build a system that forgot where it came from.